how would you define this thing called psychological safety?
Well, yeah, no, actually, interesting. I don't want to start with a disagreement, Joe, but I was recently at the CIPD, Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development Conference, and I was surprised how many people didn't know what it was.
Really? That's
Yeah.
really, I didn't, I wanted to go this year, but I couldn't. You're telling me that a lot of people don't know what it is. That's amazing.
They're two words which are used effectively in all sorts of situations. There's some confusion around, some people just don't like the word psychology. They don't, that feels a little bit,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not real business. That's mumbo jumbo. That's kind of HR speak or not a proper science or whatever. And then the safety thing, is feels maybe as if are we mollycoddling? Are we trying to make people
The nanny state at work. Hello, everyone in podcast land. Yes, it's me again, Joe Espana, welcoming you to this penultimate episode in our current series of Glimpses of the Blindingly Obvious, the show where I chinwag with people who are far more knowledgeable than me about things that are sometimes just staring at us right in the face. Now, this week is International Inclusion Week. And as you probably know, inclusion and diversity is one of the four dimensions in which psychological safety at work is perceived by others. As I'm a continuing student of organizational behavior, and in particular, the cultures we try to build through leadership, team effectiveness, and employee engagement, I'm really interested in psychological safety and how it contributes to how we feel at work. But of course, talking about psychological safety and creating that kind of environment does raise some interesting challenges for team leaders. The idea of it might make sense, but making it happen can be tricky. So I thought, who better to talk to about this than my good colleague, Scott Chambers, who is totally steeped in the subject. He's the managing partner of Kairos Change, working with all sorts of organizations, developing teams to collaborate, innovate, and perform at a higher level. So we've got a lot of interests in common. One case in point, and to paraphrase Scott, if you accept the vast majority of leaders are well-intentioned, how do we end up with so many disengaged and mediocre performing teams in our organizations? So let's jump in and have a chat about why, if you want to build psychological safety, you go first.
I had the fortunate opportunity to be interviewed by the Financial Times on this as well, and that was their kind of gambit. That is like, well, so is this not just woke gone mad? Is this just not everybody trying to make everybody happy?
The cynicism of journalists is
Yeah, yeah,
brilliant,
yeah.
isn't it?
Well, I'm not. I met someone last week, and So his answer to my what's your understanding of psychological safety? He said, well, I've read a bit about it, but I'm pretty cynical. Uh, we had a great conversation, and actually, I respect his cynicism. So his cynicism was the difference between talking about it and doing it.
Right, that's a really good one, actually,
Yeah,
because
yeah, no,
I
absolutely.
think it's really pertinent to our conversation because I think the proposal I would make straight away, I mean, we haven't quite defined it yet, but I would propose straight away. The idea is a great one, and obviously, you and I, we're coming at it from the angle of attack that not only is it a good idea, organizations need it, but doing it sometimes can be really tricky or challenging for that the notion of creating an environment which is actually psychologically safe for people who are part of it. So I kind of agree on that side of things.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of saying the right things. I think it is less clear that a lot of organizations are doing the right things. But yeah, no, you make good point. We haven't defined it. So the definition. So we follow, I guess, the research and evidence that Amy Edmondson,
Yeah, yeah.
in her book The Fearless Organization, captured. So the definition, our working definition, is belief that you will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So
that's brilliant. Would that include feelings?
yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. So I guess it depends on the nature of the feelings. If you feel uncertain, or if you are sharing a feeling that this project might not work, or this project might be going the wrong way, or we might not be talking about some of the real issues, then that absolutely. In fact, I had that with a group just the other day, and one of the key takeouts they took out was to trust their instincts.
Oh, wow.
And interestingly, they're a very rational organization, and the argument that won them over was your instincts is just another data point.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. I think this is really interesting and thanks for clarifying that definition so that, our listeners kind of are on the same page with us as we explore this. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges that might exist. And where I'd like to get your view on this to start with is, do you think that in your experience, when you've been exploring this with organizations or working specifically with teams on this subject, that they perceive a difference between, how you've defined psychological safety in a group and the notion of interpersonal trust?
Yeah, well, it's a good question because there's often some confusion about those two things.
Right.
So my simple response is that, and it is simple, but it's that trust is a one-on-one sense. So I trust you, Joe. You trust me.
Yeah.
I may trust, I know, Marks and Spencers as a brand. I may trust Nike. I may trust an organization, but it's one-on-one. And if you put that into a team context, I may trust all my colleagues.
Yep.
Psychological safety is a team, a systemic construct.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is when those individual team members come together that what's the shared sense of safety then. And you will know, because you do a lot of teamwork as I do, that if you have one-to-one with team members, if you speak to each team member about kind of what's the challenges in the team, how's it all going, what's the interpersonal dynamic, what are the things that need to be addressed if we're going to increase our performance, you pretty quickly get a picture of what the issues are. People are quite open and honest. They trust you. You put them back in the room together and say, right, now I want to talk about this, which you've all told me is an issue. And everyone says, I don't know what you're talking about, Scott. Yeah. I didn't say that was an issue. I've resorted to literally putting the comments in quotes and saying somebody said this, and everybody denies it.
Yeah,
that's psychological safety. It's the collective sense of an environment where we can all share our disagreements, our agreements, our thoughts, our opinions, our instincts, our emotions, to pick up your earlier question. And it won't be held against me. It won't be experienced as negative for anybody in the room.
Yeah, or there won't be any repercussions as a consequence either. Absolutely. It's really interesting because I've experienced exactly that, and you kind of think, oh my God, did I capture this information? Anyway, but what something that sort of sprung to mind from how you were describing it, Scott, is that it feels to me that the interpersonal aspect of trust, so one-to-one, how I feel about you, you feel about me, and whether I'm willing to sort of, open up to you at an individual level, that feels like it's got to be one of the ingredients in the cake called the psychological safety environment that we're operating in. Because it feels to me that if we don't have sufficient interpersonal trust, it makes it really challenging to then, create a group atmosphere where it's okay to disagree and all the other things we've mentioned.
Yes, there's a logic to that, although, as you know, emotions don't necessarily work logically. And arguably, I mean, obviously it's going to be easier if everybody trusts each other. However, it is not essential because the team psychological safety may overwrite any interpersonal distrust. So because we are in this shared space, we are making decisions, having conversations together, actually any individual friction or concern or lack of trust might be overridden by the collective purpose and the collective felt sense of safety.
That I really go with that and slightly disagree at the same time. So, what I've experienced in the past is the collective atmosphere when a group is working together and there is enough safety, basically, a feeling that the individual can say what they want to say in this group setting that they might not say to a colleague, one to one, because their interpersonal level of trust is lower. Let's say that I totally agree that happens, but it's really interesting that I think that people's perceptions of how psychological safety might work in this group very often stems from their have I got a tension or a conflict with this other person, this other team member, that therefore means our interpersonal trust is maybe lower than it could be, and that's a driver for well, I'm not going to say what I want to say even in this group setting because I know it's going to really fuel the tension between you and I, let's say, at a one-to-one level. So I think there's these two things. Nothing's really clear cut for me in this area. There's a lot of blurred edges around it. And the other thing I wanted to add to that, what I wanted to ask you about is, in your experience, the extent to which you think cultural diversity or maybe even cultural biases play into creating this feeling of psychological safety in the team.
Oh, well, there's no question that we arrive with our own set of beliefs and values. I just want to go back to that trust to your comment, if I may, Joe. So actually, if there is a stress or a tension or a lack of trust between two individual participants in a team, it's actually the best place to resolve it is in the team context.
I agree.
Because you're breaking the logjam that might be, I say it's blue and you say it's green. Actually, so let's get other people involved in the conversation and let's get other opinions. And that's one of the huge advantages of psychological safety in a team is you do hear that diverse set of opinions, that diverse approach to a problem, or that diverse understanding and experience and expertise focusing on the problem through a different lens.
I totally agree. Can I give you it's some years ago, but it's a brilliant, I think, example of exactly what you've just spoken about. And it relates to the title of this episode about the leader really going first. I think the leader needs to go first in terms of trying to promote this atmosphere environment in the team. And I was in a situation where I was working with an executive team, and I was working with them for quite a long time. It ended up being something like 18 months or something like that. And I remember that about halfway through, I'd already been advised by the CEO. They said, look, we want to do X, Y, and Z, but you ought to be aware there's a little bit of tetchiness between the commercial director and the finance director. I said, okay, right. Okay, well, I'll bear that in mind, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we progressed. Anyway, the day came when we were all together and they were struggling with a particular business issue. And the CEO sort of took the conversation in a particular direction that was like stabbing these two people in the heart. Right. And all of a sudden, the whole conversation ended up for at least 20 minutes, these two people taking over the airspace and ranting at each other. Anyway, I thought, okay, how am I going to handle this? And we were all sitting in a circle as it happened. And when the sort of noise died down and sort of they all took breath, the CEO was sitting to my left. And I turned round to him and I said, now, so-and-so, what do you make of that, what you've just experienced? Because I wanted to, explore that particular thing. And he said to me, well, look, as far as I'm concerned, they're old enough and ugly enough and professional enough to deal with their issues. And, I expect them to sort it out amongst themselves. And then I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So I then asked him, Okay, so how do you think you might have unintentionally contributed to what we've just experienced? And of course, he looked at it. The answer to my question was very narrow in the sense that he said, "What are you talking about? I didn't do anything. I haven't done anything." I left that answer hang in the air for a minute, and bless her cotton socks, the HR director turned around and she said, "Exactly. So you've known this thing between us for ages, and the thing that you did was not to do anything, to not moderate or intervene or try and
Yeah. The
find."
absence of action is action in itself.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I thought that was really an interesting thing about, which I think is another challenge and also a practical issue for team leaders that, you know, um, yeah, as we started our conversation, psychological safety isn't going to happen just because you wake up one morning and go, right, we're going to create a psychological safety, safe environment here today. And it's just going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think the team leaders do have to take some action and start to create or catalyst the situation.
Yeah. It is unlikely to occur if the team leader isn't seeking to make it happen. It is not up to the team leader alone to make it happen.
Indeed, I totally agree with that. So let's go back to the point where I was asking you about in
Yeah.
terms of
Cultural
cultural
diversity.
biases and our own values, etc., perspectives.
Yeah. Well, yes, we all turn up in any team situation with baggage, cultural, educational, all sorts of filters and beliefs that we built up over unconsciously over our lifetime. So yes, those obviously do feature in any psychological safety context because that's the lens that we're using to view the world. And what I would say observationally, I'm not sure I can say it scientifically, but having now worked with hundreds of teams where we measure psychological safety, so we know the levels of psychological safety and we measure it for both the team and the individuals within it. What seems to be emerging is that any, and I quote, minority tends to feel less safe than the majority. And the
Right, it's
simplest
interesting.
example I can give you of that is if you have a multinational team
Yeah,
where there are non-first language English speakers, it is typical that the non-first language English speakers will just feel slightly less safe because they
yeah,
don't have the same tools in terms of vocabulary,
yeah,
education, background, idioms, all those sorts of things. Probably a shared educational background of some sort. All those sorts of things are different. So it just detriments their felt sense of psychological safety. So maybe they won't speak up as much because they don't have the language to perhaps make a nuanced point or a subtle point or a half thought through point about
yeah.
a conversation that's going on.
So
So
they self-edit. I mean, one of the
yeah, oh
outcomes is
yeah.
they
There's an
absolutely
awful lot of
self-edit.
self-editing in psychological safety.
Yeah, interesting. I was wondering also to add to that, it's not just the language part, but also I'm thinking around uh, uh, a lot of different geographical ethnic cultures will have different values and precepts about hierarchy in the team. I mean, we
Yeah.
might have it over here in the Western world as well. I mean, I've worked with very senior teams in the past where you interview individuals and somebody says, even when they're English and the English is their first language, they'll say to me, "Well, actually, you realise we're not all equal in this team." And they've
Mm.
already got a sense of hierarchy, even as a member of the team. So I'm just thinking, if you take that idea geographically, where I don't know, I don't want to stereotype, but let's say Southeast Asian um, uh, uh, geographies might view hierarchy as you must respect the hierarchy and the maturity perhaps of somebody else in the way that you engage in a conversation with them, and therefore you're self-editing in a way.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely true. And again, I've had the fortune to work quite a lot in many different cultures, from Latin America to Southeast Asia. Just earlier this week, I worked with a team, a technology team in India, And yes, those everything you've said is true. There are differences. People arrive at different perspectives, and frankly, that's the joy of psychological safety, because it's kind of overwriting that. It's we accept and acknowledge and believe and understand all of those things, and we want everybody to be able to speak up with ideas, questions, concerns, and mistakes. It's the felt permission for candor. And I often use the metaphor of the climate versus the weather. Yeah, any team can create its own weather. Any
I love
team
it.
can create the environment where they have this felt permission for candor, even in a toxic culture. And I have worked with psychological safety in some pretty toxic cultures. And that question about how can we do this given X, Y, and Z, given our particular charismatic founder leader has a particular way of operating, but you can do this at a micro level. In fact, that's where it really benefits, because that's where the work gets done. It gets done in the team. It gets done in a collective endeavor to a shared purpose. So finding the capacity to work together for that shared purpose is a gift to any team, regardless of culture. And we've worked in Japan, we worked in Thailand, we worked in India, we're working extensively across Singapore and now into China. So I've talked about psychological safety with about 250 Chinese people in one particular organization, and it resonates at a human level, not at a cultural level, but at a human level.
Yeah, I think that's you've. I'm going to quote you. There's a couple of things you've said there that I think really land with me. The first is this notion of felt permission for candor. I'm going to steal that if that's okay.
Please feel free.
And the other one is the idea that this is a micro level intervention in a sense, or
Yes.
creation. And I think it's a very practical thing to consider for the leader of that team, because this creating the sense or the feeling of permission for candor in that team, I think needs to be role modeled. I think you unlock somehow. You might not open the door completely, but you unlock it a bit with the team leader kicking the whole thing off, starting by role modeling what he's talking about in terms of psychological safety. Now, that doesn't mean to say they wouldn't maybe have some external support by people like you and me, etc. But I think the team leader has to start.
Absolutely. So I would say the start point for a team leader is to show up with some vulnerability.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a paradox. I think our traditional heroic model of leader is the leader is all knowing and all powerful.
Yeah.
I remember the first day I was made a leader. I left on Friday as a normal person and arrived back with superpowers and super knowledge and super experience and capacity to make decisions that I probably didn't even understand at that age.
You forget that you came to work wearing your pants over your trousers rather than underneath them. But I love this idea of fallibility.
We fall for it. Yeah, we fall for it ourselves. We believe that of ourselves after a time, because people keep asking our opinion. So we suddenly believe that our opinion is better than other people's opinion.
Yeah. Or that we know it all. Because I love it when very senior people say to me, well, Joe, what you've got to understand is, I've got 30 plus years of experience in this industry, and they basically give me the verbal CV, and I think it's fantastic. But then the next question I ask is, when's the last time you apologized for a mistake to your team? And they go, oh, well, yeah, of course I do apologize. Really? Okay.
I wonder. Yeah. Well, I'm particularly impressed. I don't know if you are aware of or followed Satya Nadal.
Name doesn't ring a bell.
Satya Nadal is the third ever CEO of Microsoft.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay. That's where the name comes.
Yeah. So Satya Nadal came in. He followed. I've forgotten his name now, but so it's Bill Gates. I've gone out of my head. I can picture him. Anyway, so he's of Indian heritage. So picking up your cultural piece, but one of the cultural changes that Satya Nadal has initiated is from know it all to learn it all.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Yeah, it's and I was working with a team a couple of weeks ago where one of the senior team members was an ex-Enron person. And we all know
Wow.
with Enron,
Yeah.
and their mantra was the smartest guys in the room. If you work for
Yeah.
Enron and you're in a room, then you're the smartest guys in the room.
Yeah. And
We
look
know
where
what
that got
happened
them.
to Enron.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So this capacity, so psychological safety is about recognizing that we no longer have the answers. Today's VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, means that it's impossible for the leader to know everything. It is probably unlikely that everybody in the room that in your team knows everything, but between you, you know a lot more than any one member. And by showing up vulnerably, listening, understanding the team perspective, you can probably generate some new thinking and new ideas, which is actually what the business needs or what the team needs or what is going to make the difference in performance.
First of all, thank you so much for chin wagging with me this today about our subject. You want to build psychological safety, you go first, you team leader go first. And thanks for the tips and for exploring the subject a little bit more with me. Thanks so much.
No, it's been a pleasure. Good to reconnect, Joe.
All right, you take care, and I'll speak to you again soon. Please connect with us wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up, subscribe so you don't miss any of the episodes, and engage in the conversation. So if you have any questions, or if you'd like to make a point, or if you have a suggestion perhaps for an episode, a subject area for us to explore together, then please do get in contact, because I'd like us to be all part of this conversation and see where it leads us. So in the meantime, until next time, look after yourselves and see you or speak to you very soon.